Okay. Okay, we're going to be starting chapter 22 this morning. So I titled this, Character is Worth More Than Gold and Debt is Slavery. So those are the two key things. This morning we got through verse 12, so that's kind of our goal, is to get through the first 12 verses today, if we can. So somebody want to read verse 1 and then get started?
I'll do it.
Proverbs.
Thank you. Proverbs 22:1. A good name is to be chosen rather than great riches, loving favor rather than silver and gold.
So I was kind of thinking about this, and a lot of people get great riches by doing things that ruin their name, right? Think of like Bill Gates, for instance, right now. He's been, under indictment and charges in like 6 countries. He had to cancel his last meeting, because of fear. All right, James, good to see you, man.
Good to see you.
So, he made a lot of choices based on greed, based on other things. And it worked for a long time, but now the recompense comes. And I don't want to say that you don't get riches, because notice the verse, it says great riches. But we need to have the expectation and the understanding that what God gives is more eternal. We covered another Proverbs on the children aspect, remember? It says a good man gives inheritance to his children's children, right? So what type of inheritance are you going to be able to carry on to your children's children, right? And by those type of generations, they're going to forget the wealth. It may be gone. Or if it is, it was done at such an evil cost. There's people, for instance, I've read, like the Rothschild family that has so much wealth. They actually engineer the marriages, and they married within the family. And they've married within the family so often now that their DNA is like not good, right? Like they try to do distant cousins or something, but they're trying to so much capture the wealth that they've lost the big picture, right?
That's pretty weird.
But that's what you end up doing. So, you're going to have to serve God or man, right? Which is money, essentially. And that's what this is. And the loving favor is better than silver or gold, right? So your reputation, your character, those are the things. So what are you doing to perpetuate that good reputation and that character in your daily choices? Anybody?
What are you supposed to look like?
What are you doing for that character and goodness in your daily choices and your reputation? How do you develop that? How do you develop it?
Consistency.
Consistency is a big thing, right? What?
Good work.
Good works, yeah. Because like James said, remember the quote from James?
Doing the same things that if you were by yourself, if others were there, even one of the people that
Yeah.
are looking at you, you carry yourself the same way.
James says some of them will speak of their wealth. Me, I'm going to do my good works, and that's going to show my faith, right? So it's not faith. Good works doesn't get you to heaven, but what it is a proof of is that there's fruit in your life, and that you're actually doing things. So it's not good works to get to heaven. That's a whole different religion. It's not Christianity. But if you have faith, you're going to have works. If it's true faith, and it's not just words, right? We covered that, and I think it was Matthew 23. And they had the fig tree that had leaves and no fruit, right? So it looked like it was going to bear fruit, but it wasn't. And then Jesus made it withered, right? Because it had no fruit. Okay, verse 2. Let's go on.
The rich and the poor have this in common. The Lord is the maker of them all.
So, this is another one of those Proverbs things where it takes wisdom, right? So we're all made by God's image, right? If you're human, you have God's image. But that doesn't mean we also have free will. So what, I believe it was McGee here, but I'm not sure, I didn't put the reference. But the difference here is not all of us are God's children, okay? We're all made in God's image, but we're not all His children. Now, why are some of us not God's children? Charades, 2 words.
They had accepted Christ.
Yeah, that's it. I was going to say free will, right? But
Yeah.
same thing, right? They have the choice because God wants our love. He doesn't want to make robots, right? So He wants us to choose us. So they have free will. And if you're looking for scriptural reference, John 8:4 here, Jesus clearly told the Pharisees of the day when they said, "Our father is Abraham," and He says, "No, your father is the devil," right? So they were speaking it. They had the leaves of the tree of religion, but they had no fruit, right? And that's what we've got to guard against. I think it was Gandhi that said, "I would be a Christian if it weren't for the Christians," right? Which is a sad statement on us, right? That we fail so bad at our Christianity that, you know, people can't see past the hypocrisy. Okay. So we have to treat everybody as in God's image, but we also have to use wisdom and discernment to know whose father they are. Right. So let me give you an example. So Jesus talked about the truth and love, right? So without love, the truth can be a weapon. So the example I thought of was the Danbury Baptists. Have you heard of those people?
What?
Right? The Danbury Baptists, right? They go to gay people's funerals and they protest them and tell them that they're burning in hell. Right? So that may be the truth, but there's absolutely no love. That's total hate, right? And that's not how you're going to reach those people, right? That's not it. So we have to be able to balance that love and truth. And we also have to have discernment, you know, so we can be right. And also hate the sin, but not the sinner, right? And that's a tough balance, right? That takes discernment, wisdom, you know, that type of thing. And there's lots of populations where we struggle as Christians, right? It grates on our nerves when somebody comes in cussing and, you know, and flaunting and all that. But we have to understand that they're made in God's image and they may just be confused. So sometimes we got to give them a little rope and kind of test them and try to see if they're actually curious or, you know, because some of them just don't know, right? Some are just ignorant. Okay. Verse 3.
The dead man forsakes evil and hides himself, but the simple pass on and are punished.
So we talked about this a little bit this morning, in that our own free will can get us into trouble, right? We see evil and we see the caution signs, but yet we go forward because it looks good. The fruit looks good. It'll be fun, right? What will it matter? Everybody else does it. All those rationales that we've all used, right? Yet, if you're prudent, you're going to pass on that and you're going to escape the judgment and the sowing and the reaping that are associated with it. Right? Okay. You know, and I would say, I just mentioned here in the question fear. You know, fear is mentioned, depending on your translation, almost 365 times in the Bible. So there's a reason they did it 365 times, because we need a daily reminder about fear. Because that's going to be a spiritual, it's probably one of the best spiritual, fear and pride, and there's a few others, but that the devil works on, right? So we make decisions out of fear a lot of times. And when you go back and you look, at least in my life, almost every decision I made out of fear, with the exception of maybe rattlesnakes, I've regretted, right?
Fight or flight, right?
Yeah.
Fight or flight.
Yeah, because you're making an emotional decision. Most of the time, we have a lot more time than people tell us. You know, a lot of times they'll tell you, oh no, you have to make a decision right now. You know, typical car salesman, this deal is going to go away. You know, no. Pray. Pause, pray. Use your brain. Right? But we were not given a spirit of fear, but a spirit of sound mind. Right? I think that's the verse. Let's go on to 4. Who wants to read?
Like humility and the fear of the Lord are riches and honor and life.
Okay, the fear there, when respecting the Lord, it means awe. It means respect. Because you know it's not that you want to fear him as far as not getting close to him, but you want to respect the power he has. And you know, one of my pet peeves is some of the Christian songs. They kind of come across as Jesus is my boyfriend, real light. No, Jesus is Lord of Lords, King of Kings. You know, there's a difference here. You know, there's a holy requirement. There's some awe and fear around Jesus, right, and the Lord. And all you have to do is turn on the TV when people say the Lord's name in vain repeatedly, and you can see there's no awe and fear of the Lord. Right. And the thing here is honor and life. And then I kind of talked about it here, about the talents. We went through that on Wednesday night, but the parable of the talents. So, you know, we're all given talents. We're all given something of God. And we're expected to produce that fruit like we've talked about, according to what we were given. And if y'all remember that parable the other night, the one who had it the worst was the one that hid his talent, right? So God expects us to use our talent, and sometimes that means risk, right? Sometimes you've got to take a risk, because he told them to go trade with it. Well, trading, the mere act, means that you can lose it. So you have to engage in some level of risk, but you also need to be doing it prudent with a sound mind, you know, and trust the Lord, right? Make sense? Thoughts, questions? How many of y'all have been too safe with your talents, or too shy and not using them? Yeah.
Too shy. Yeah, too shy.
Yeah. Here, I'm a government employee, right? So I've traded security over, you know, higher pay, right? So we're all guilty to a certain extent of, because if I was really not fearing, then I would have already started several businesses, you know. Okay, 22:8.
Huh?
Is it verse? Oh, yeah. Sorry, I guess I'm off. Wrong page. Sorry.
I was like, that 5 does look like an 8 though.
Yeah.
Thorns and snares are in the way of the perverse. He who guards his soul will be far from it.
Okay, I think this is more what I was talking about before on the decisions, right? There's thorns and snares. I mean, your story, John, was perfect earlier today, right? You got to that stop sign, and you knew if you took a left, you were going to be tempted. So you took a right and went to the gas station on the right, right? Because you knew your discernment that's God-given said, don't go in the way of the path of the thorns and snares, right? So you went and made a left and went right to the gas station and used the cash the way it was intended to be instead of another way that would have led to thorns and snares. And we're all tempted to do that. I mean, we're coming up to tax time. There's a lot of temptation right now, right? To cheat, cut corners on the taxes, or be disappointed, right? I turned in my taxes for my farm, and I told them all these expenses. I said, okay, well, I depreciated the tractor side by side. The farm is just in a hole right now because I can't sell any trees until they get big, right? And then I said, I put in this huge irrigation system. And she goes, oh, no, you got to depreciate the irrigation too. I'm like, so, it's the things like that, right? So I kind of already counted on, it was an expense item, but no, it's depreciated. So those type of things that we have to watch out for. So, and I just put here, we talked about this earlier, but how many of our problems are caused by our wandering and poor decisions?
All of them?
All of them.
Yeah, I would say probably not all. This is we talked about this before with Proverbs because it's wisdom literature. There's always an exception, but you look at Job, right? Job didn't do anything. He was righteous, yet he had that testing. You look at the disciples when Jesus told them to go across the lake and he'd meet them on the other side, and he knew the storm was coming, and he expected them to go through the storm, right? But yet, while he's walking by, they're terrified and cry out to him, and he rescues them, right? But he expects us to go through the storm, and sometimes he sends us through those storms. But I would say that's the exception. Most of the storms, at least in my life, I've caused myself out of poor decisions. I don't know about y'all. Yeah. So let's go on to 6.
Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart.
This has been a constant subject in my house. The part of this, if I could rewrite the Bible, I would say train them up in the way of the Lord and they will never depart, ever. But that's Cody's translation, not the Bible translation. Solomon says when they grow old, they will not depart. So apparently my children are not old yet because they've departed. But I'm trying to get them back. They're making steps, but they're not there yet, right? And that's that darned free will, And if you have children and you go through this, then you have to remind yourself that you too were like that, right? You too departed from God, like most of us. I can't speak for all of you, but I went through a lot, way away from God before I came to Christ. And a lot of us have those stories, and we've departed, and some of us didn't come back until we were old. So we just hold out hope when they go off course and count on the Lord, because there comes a point, several of y'all have little ones now, but there comes a point, my youngest now is 19, and parenting is a little more difficult, right, when they're that age, 19 to 23, so you can see them headed towards the tree, but you can't grab the wheel. You just kind of tell them, hey, there's a tree ahead. And then they go, I know, Dad, you know, as they floor it towards the tree, right? And then you have to be there when they pick up the pieces and they hit the tree like you told them they were gonna do, you know. So, 22:7, who liked trees?
Rituals of the poor, the borrower, servants of
Okay, so this kind of gets back to what we've mentioned before with Bill Gates and those type. There's a lot of people that, you know, make their living through oppressing the poor, right? I mean, all we have to do is look at credit cards. You know, credit card companies with the outrageous percentage they're charged, right? There's so many of them that live off the oppression of the poor. There's, you know, whole political parties that are, you know, dependent on government handouts, right? So if you keep them needing the government handout, then you can guarantee the vote. And that's not a new thing. That goes all the way back to the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire, part of the reason it fell was because they decided as a democracy to pay themselves instead of just paying for the infrastructure and the, you know, and we are no different in many ways. Even our tax system is a lot higher now. But I say it to say that there's a lot of people that are rich because of their oppression of the poor. This doesn't mean that you can't be rich and be a Christian. We've kind of talked about that before. We'll get to more verses on that. And then the second half of this is the borrower is servant to the lender. So do you think our society takes this into account today?
I feel like we're changing now. I feel like with what's happening in our society, in our country, I think people are starting to understand just how, I think they're starting to see that more than ever. Like, that, yeah, having all these bills, having credit cards, or even having a car note is being enslaved to that lender. There's a lot of things happening in our country there. It's reshaping us and moving forward.
Yeah, we have a debt-based society. So I don't know if any of you have any dollar bills or in your wallet, but if you pull it out, I know they're almost passé now, but if you pull it out and you look at it, it says it's a Federal Reserve note.
Sure.
So if you're not familiar with legal and finance, note means debt. So you are getting paid when you go get paid in debt. Our whole society is debt, right? Everything, even the dollar bills that we call cash, are really debt to the Federal Reserve, right? So it's hard for us to, and then think of ways we've been slaves to it, right? So a lot of this, you know, is on us as a society. It wasn't always this way in the U.S. I mean, silver and gold was the currency and still is in the Constitution, but it's not today because it's been taken over for debt, right? Because people can make money, right? When there's a debt instrument, that means there's an interest rate. There's somebody on the other end that's making money, right? So just things for you to think about, you know, and to try to be wise about, you know, if you do invest, make sure it's in assets and not in debt. All right. Okay. You know, let's go on to verse 3 or 8. Now we're finally on 8.
He who sows
Inequity.
inequity. He who sows inequity will reap sorrow, and the rod of his anger will fail.
So this kind of gets back to the fear aspect, right? There's a rod of anger, right? And that keeps us down a lot of times because we have fear. You know, people that speak out, you know, especially in other countries, but even in America now, you're having people that, you know, are speaking out or being silenced. You know, there's a fear aspect to it, right? Even in the church world, for the longest time, you know, churches would be threatened by the IRS if they take away their tax exempt status, right? If they spoke on politics. We're supposed to have this wall, but I know in the last 5 years or so that's changed because, and you know how it changed? It changed from pastors that stood up. So it grew from a small number to hundreds to thousands of them started sending letters and transcripts of their Sunday sermon that included politics and said, I dare you, right? And then finally the IRS, under pressure, knowing they can't really take the exemption away from a church, clarified, right? Because it was a fear tactic. It wasn't really there. It was a fear thing. You know? We have to be careful of fear. We don't always make the best situations of fear. In COVID, I remember fighting with my daughter's school because she did cross country and they were making her wear a mask while she ran outside during cross country. She was having rashes all around her face, and I went toe to toe with the school. I was angry, righteously angry. And then, but we make a lot of foolish decisions out of fear. And just know that, and I've said this before, but especially for you, Jonathan, going into this week, we talked about, you know, you should, when something comes into your head, especially this next week, because you're going to get presented with some stuff after you being baptized today, you should run it through that filter. And if it produces fear, whatever's coming into your head produces fear, you know it's not of God. Because remember, God told you 365 times not to fear. If it produces faith, then it's good. You want to keep it. It's like a triage. So as things go into your head, you got to capture in your mind, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And then we talked about this before, but the iniquity eventually will reap sorrow. I mean, even, we've talked about this before, but like Larry Fink, I think of BlackRock, you know, he's supposedly the richest man. And everybody that knows him says he's miserable, right? Because you can have earthly riches, but you can't have the fruits of the Spirit. So one of the things that you do when you choose that way is you give up peace. You give up love. You give up all those fruits of the Spirit. But yet again, we have free will. Let's go to 9, verse 9.
David through his achievers, I ask for the so he gives his bread to the poor.
So this is another thing about, can God trust you? This is like the talents, right? So, you know, I'll tell a quick story here. Some of you were here when I did this, but many of you weren't. But I used to have a garden before I had the tree farm. And I honestly, the first year of the garden, I complained about the garden. Dollar cost averaged, and I think I had $100 per tomato or something. It was terrible. And so the second year, I got kind of convicted about my spirit towards the garden. So I started praying over the garden. And then when the first fruits came in, I took some of the fruits and gave it to the manna house. And then right after I did that, my garden exploded with growth, right? Because I changed my attitude. I started praying for the garden, and then I also gave from the garden think a lot of the times, maybe it's just me, but I tend to speak negatively on things because I react, I have my feelings, and I have to check myself. I've done that even with children, which is really bad. So once I started changing the way I was speaking towards my children, then some of them started coming back. Because a lot of this that we think is physical, it's actually spiritual. So we need to think about the way we speak and pray about things. And make sure you're speaking life and abundance and that type of thing. Okay. Verse 10.
Proverbs 22:10. Cast out the scoffer, and contention will leave. Yes, strife and reproach will cease.
Okay. Does anybody have a contentious scoffer at work or
This guy right here.
in their family? Anybody like that?
Not anymore.
Not anymore. Good. Yeah, I mean, there are certain people that are just contentious, right? So how do we deal with
Just kind of stay away from them, or like just.
I just kill them with kindness.
There you go.
It works best, like, just to act like it doesn't bother you and like just really pray for them that, you know, God softens their heart and just to continue to do what He want you to do. And then eventually, I feel like may soften to that because it's really hard to be mean to someone or scoff at someone constantly that's just humble, you know.
I would agree. A lot of times they're doing it because of the reaction too. And once you take away the benefit for them doing it, then sometimes it lightens. But I think those answers are good. You definitely don't want to participate.
Yeah. So like.
You don't want to fuel the fire.
When I was in the service, a lot of some of my fellow peers in my section, they would haze me or harass me, you know, with like homosexual jokes. They call me homosexual. And initially, you know, I was so young, I'd be so reactive and hot-headed about it and combative. And then I realized that when I started kind of, I don't know if it implies the same thing, but I don't know if they're, you know, mocking me or insults, you know, but they're causing me a lot of issues, you know, and I would flip it on them, you know, like one time there was a guy that was like, oh, why are you late? Were you with your boyfriend kind of thing? And I was like, well, I said, don't you remember? You're my boyfriend. You know?
Yeah.
So I started turning it on them or involving them, then it all stopped, you know. So I don't know if it applies here, but for me, I feel like it did. Because,
Embrace the gayness.
there you go. But anyways, that's the kind of stuff that, you know, I dealt with in the service. So once I started, like I said, including them in the mocking or in the insults, it just ceased.
Yeah.
You know.
So I'm not sure that's the absolute Christian way of doing it, but it is using wisdom. So I will give it that. I will give it that, and it did work. But yeah.
We got the result I wanted. I wanted to stop. So, and I couldn't beat up everybody that made a comment. You know. So.
Yeah, exactly. No, I get it. I get it. Okay, let's go to verse 11.
He who loves purity of heart and has grace on his lips, the king will be his friend.
Okay, so what does this proverb, what is it based on? How can this proverb be true and how can it not be true?
Motives and thought, pure of heart. So pretty much, like I feel like when you're giving, so like when you're, okay, for instance, you see someone on the street or just giving to anybody that's in need from just the goodness of your heart, not expecting anything in return, I feel that's when it kind of comes back to you in abundance. When you're like, oh, you know, let me help this person out because in the end I'll get blessed.
Yeah.
It doesn't. I don't sense that it works out that way. Whenever every time I give to anybody, it's solely just out of, I feel like it's the right thing to do. You know, you see them suffering, you see them in need, or just out of, you know, out of the kindness of your heart. You know, you feel it. You just, here you go, man. You know, don't need anything in return. I just want to give it to you because I see your hurt. So yeah, purity, motives.
But
purity
how
motives.
about this other part? The king will be his friend. So if you have love, purity of heart, and grace on your lips, when will the king be your friend in this circumstance, and when will the king not be your friend?
You do it willingly, not waiting for permission.
What do you think? Yeah, I think you're getting closer. So I think what Solomon is getting when he's writing this is the theory that the king should be righteous. So if the king is righteous, then all of this is true. But you know, there's another verse that when the righteous reign, the people rejoice, and when the wicked reign, the people groan. Right? So if you've got a wicked king, they're not going to be interested in purity of heart and grace on your lips. Right? So once again, even the verse takes some discernment. Right? We have to be able to discern what type of person we're dealing with, because not all kings are righteous. Right? There's a lot there. So, but what this does say is that you're going to be getting, if you do practice this, then you're going to have an opportunity or a position of influence. Y'all remember in Acts? Good luck, we'll see you down there. In Acts, remember Peter and Paul and all of them, they got brought up in front of kings, right? They got brought up in front of rulers, right? Because God gave them that opportunity. And that's what we can count on, is that if we just keep, we're going to be put in a position of influence. In the Old Testament, all the kings had prophets, right? They would try to encourage, they're called pastors and prophets, right? They had one person that would be concerned about their behavior and their attitudes, and they had other people that would kind of speak into their decisions and their wisdom, and whether they should go to war or not, or inquire of the Lord on their behalf. And what does the New Testament call us as believers? Priests and kings, right? So we're supposed to be that. We're supposed to be that voice, that salt and light. We're supposed to be that influence. He may not called us to be a king, but we may be called to be the Nehemiah, or, the servant to the king, or something where we can have the influence to put that in. And sometimes that job is tough. Like I know in the news, the lady that had some spiritual difficulties with Zionism, and she was on the faith committee and appointed by Trump, and she got canned, right? Because she spoke out. But she did what I believe she felt like she felt, and I believe it was a solid theological position, but there was no tolerance or disagreement in that community. And sometimes that's what we've got to do. Sometimes we will get called out. Sometimes we will get tested. But that might mean that God's opening a new door. Right? Okay. Let's go to verse 12 and then we'll get out of here early today.
The eyes of the Lord preserve knowledge, but he overthrows the words of the faithless.
So, somebody want to read the life application commentary there for us?
Knowledge refers to those who live righteous with truth. It takes discipline, determination, and hard work to live God's way. God protects and rewards those who make the commitment to follow Him. The unfaithful may seem to have an easier time of it in the long run than things fail, but a wise amounts to nothing. Don't resist God and expect lasting success.
So, I think I like the discipline, determination, and hard work, right? That's the way of the Lord, is you gotta kind of be faithful. faithful, like some of y'all said earlier, even when people aren't watching, right? And then, you know, the things, you know, don't let the left hand know what the right hand is doing, you know? You don't have to be public about your giving, right? Give in secret, you know? And God will honor it, right? You don't want to be like the hypocrites, right? And a lot of us, you know, we think that they have an easier time of it, but we're not around their dinner table, right? We're not around their house, and, you know, just like on some of the other ones, you know, it's better to be on the corner of a roof than inside the house with a contentious woman, right? Some of those verses. Well, if you have unfaithfulness in your life, you're gonna have that contention in your household. You're not gonna have that peace. You're gonna be trying to control everything instead of having the peace. Part of the peace is letting the Lord steer and not trying to grab the wheel, which I'm famous for. Right? So, both the country's not. Jesus take the wheel. Right? Any thoughts, questions before we wrap up? I would agree with that. Almost everything in life that cost you something was worth it. The things that were free were not. And then normally the things that are free aren't really free either. They come with a price, sometimes a heavy price. It was earlier in Proverbs was the woman crying out, stolen wine is sweet, stolen bread is good, or something to that effect, right? So it's, you know, it may taste sweet in the moment, but it's going to be gravel later, right, in your teeth. So, okay, go ahead and close out.